when I joined the AI revolution, I was very much one of the challenges I gave to myself is how do I bring the knowledge and the understanding I have of businesses into the world of AI and vice versa? How do I inform those building and using AI of the challenges of running businesses and being able to focus on delivering value and anticipating negative impacts? In PwC, since 2017, we've been very busy to explore, first of all, what is the the AI phenomenon and what the companies like PwC operating in professional services, what's our responsibility in shaping the narrative and then being able to advise our clients how to best think about artificial intelligence technology, what are different implications, and how to work with regulators to create new regimes that will pay attention to both the innovation and the benefits this technology can unlock, but also being able to mitigate the risks. Of course, we ended up building a proposition, a toolkit, which we have deployed for clients globally in a varieties of settings. We've helped our clients with governance structure, with risk management, with ethics. And most recently, and I'm about to announce it, is not yet public knowledge. I'm going to step into a role that's similar to Anna's, heading AI public policy and ethics in PwC, continuing to work with the regulators and the public policy makers in the UK in shaping the regulatory regime, but also being able to continue to advise our clients and our executives on how to best govern AI, taking into account the regulatory and policy consideration alongside the ethical ones.
Thank you very much, Maria. Gilles.
Hello, everyone, and thank you Ron for organizing such a debate, which I believe is very much needed nowadays. So per background, I'm mostly an entrepreneur. I spent 30 years setting up companies in a technology field. So I have personally more of a tech background, even though I'm self-taught. And what is interesting is that over the course of these 30 years, I've seen the AI going from almost zero use in startups to something which is mandatory and everywhere on different forms. I haven't really been into the wave of LLM. But even though I saw it in most of the different fields of a company, different chapters, invading all the aspects of accounting, BPO, marketing, and so on. It's basically everywhere, and we don't necessarily notice it because it's very, I would say, well integrated in a very well designed manner. Along with that, over the past 10 years, I got more involved into public policies. I started to work in a French think tank called Institut Montaigne, and I joined the government as chairman of the National Digital Council in 2011, which I rejoined like 3 years ago as co-chair. And along with that, I started to work at the EU on different issues. And I think, to me, what is really fascinating is to see the interaction in between the regulation and the innovators. And I think we're going to see that more and more in the future. So I'm very much on that. And along with that, I'm also a teacher at HEC, a French business school, and a writer of books on technological topics.
Thank you very much, Gilles. So in all transparency, so the way that the session will unravel is that I will ask a few questions of the panel, and Maria, Gilles, and Anna, feel free to interject and comment on each other's comments. It is a discussion, so I will address each of you maybe to start each question, but please feel free to add to what the other person has been saying. And in all transparency, I actually use ChatGPT to come up with these 5 questions that I have for the panel. So I'm curious to think what the audience thinks of these 5 questions because I literally cut and paste them from ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, what are the 5 most pertinent things that the average executive needs to know about artificial intelligence, and what should I ask this panel of experts? So we'll start with the first question, which is related to artificial intelligence's business impact. So to the panel, can you provide concrete examples of how artificial intelligence has already transformed or can potentially transform business in various sectors? And what key strategies should executives adopt to leverage AI for their competitive advantage? Maria, maybe we could start with you.
Mm, very interesting question. Thanks, ChatGPT. There's so many different examples on how AI is making a difference right now across the value chain. I think a better question is how have we seen the result? Have we seen an ROI yet? And I think while many executives we have worked with have experimented with AI in customer support functions, and we've seen quite a significant impact in terms of cost reductions and high quality of customer support from those centers, all the way to strategy, to HR, to supply chain, to IT, traditional IT, and it's hard to pick up one. I'm more in a favor of thinking about AI in the most realistic terms possible by asking the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the key constraints that will prevent us to solve the questions? What are the key components of the solution, and how to best consider alternatives? And one of the alternatives might be not to use AI, in fact. And I think more and more we are thinking about, we're talking with our clients about a strategic thinking when it comes to
Oh, I think we have a little
on one
connection.
hand, how AI can improve the totality. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah.
How AI is able to support the businesses to deliver more value, but in the same time understand there is a disruption that needs to be managed accordingly. So keeping an eye on how to implement gradually those tools in a way that brings everyone who works in a company alongside, being able to anticipate how AI in HR will end up changing the roles performed in HR, and how to best manage that disruption. And while I have some favorite application in business of AI. I'm more focusing through my work on the strategic angle, which is very much then linked with the responsible angle that says it's not enough for us to think about the benefits. We always have to bring the risks to balance benefits and risk, and being able to really build this responsible approach that is much more rounded, because anticipates the impact, the harms, and the risks.
Thank you, Maria. I'm just curious, Anna, Gilles, or even Maria, if you have a concrete example of something of a client or a organization that has used AI in a very effective way recently, that you find interesting. Gilles, maybe you have some examples or ideas.
Yeah, I have tons of examples, but it happened that this morning I had a really interesting discussion with a group of farmers, and we came to discuss about the interest of using generative AI in their field. And something which came up very quickly in the discussion is that what is good at dealing the AI is the environments that are multifactorial and sequential. And if you think about agriculture, if you think about a farmer, it's someone who will have to decide on many aspects, on many things, on many parameters all the time. And those parameters would change over the year, over time. It's not the same before the seeding, during the harvest, and after, during the workflow behind the harvesting. And the best farmers, they would probably focus on I would say a few numbers of parameters, and they wouldn't be able to optimize their the processes in general. And something which actually is becoming a reality for those people is to use AI to increase the productivity of the field, as well as to decrease the externalities, meaning the use of fertilizers, the CO2 emission, all forms of externalities at large. And it's really efficient. It's really efficient because no one is able to manage like hundreds of parameters at a time. And it's something which does very well AI. And along with that, it can help those people to, I would say, increase the quality of their processes, meaning to change the way they decide on the type of culture they will do based on the global markets, the expectation on the long run, to have, I would say, a much broader visibility on what they should do, and to be able to explain them the reason why they would do that. I was really shocked to see how many of these farmers were already using GPT-4, uploading like some sheets, some spreadsheets, and based on the data which is in it, decide on what they should do next. So that's just one single example, but I could come with the same thing in BPO industry, industrial supply chain as well, in many aspects. I think that we are just about to see, which is something very new in the tech field, is a very strong productivity gain that we haven't seen yet in the past 30 years.
Thank you, Gilles. Anna, do you want to add anything, or?
Maybe two things maybe to add. One, and first of all, it was funny, I also thought of an example actually in the agricultural field, because there is some, especially around kind of predictive capabilities of AI, really interesting. We can see that around like temperature, ground conditions, right? But anyway, everywhere where you have a field where you have a lot of information, and as Gilles already said, like a lot of parameters that come into that decision-making process, AI can be really useful. And we see, for example, if we have we work a lot at the intersection of health and AI. And for example, decision-making and around diagnosis, there are a lot of really, really interesting examples, including triage decision-making in emergency rooms, for example, which are complex decision-making situations, right? With, again, lots and lots of different lots of different information that kind of adds to that decision-making. But at the same time, of course, I think, as we can all appreciate, so many opportunities to get things really wrong. And of course, where the kind of the responsible AI becomes even more important. The other thing I wanted to add is maybe just that I think it's useful to, though, make the distinction between in which cases and in which industries is it really transforming the businesses and really, completely changes it. And I think it's really useful to think about it more strategically. And then I think there's just the simple kind of day-to-day adoption. And in many ways, we're all using AI more and more. And I think there is no business and no one almost actually, if you look at just ChatGPT user numbers, that is not using it in some ways. I mean, today, look at this call. We have at least 4 AI note-taking devices on this here. And I think every business leader needs to think a bit about how do my employees, how do my colleagues, how do we as an organization thinking about the usage of these kind of tools, and especially I think and there was a real, I think, a real change with the arrival of a tool called ChatGPT and more large language model applications of AI, that they're just more accessible, right? And we have a tool there and an interface that is easy to use. And so therefore, in some ways and shapes or forms, we're all using it. And of course, we've all used it for many years in our Google Maps, etc. But I think there is more and more the responsibility of business leaders to think a bit about how is the day-to-day use of AI, how does it change actually my organization, and what kind of policies, partly, for example, do I want to put in place? How do I want to connect with my colleagues? How do I want to communicate with my colleagues? To what degree do I want to use these tools or not use these tools? So I think there is the transformative kind of, in a way, opportunity of AI and how it can really transform businesses, and then the day-to-day, somewhat more mundane use. But I think some of that becomes more and more important.
Thank you, Anna. And I'll continue with the next question with you first, if you don't mind. The next question is really regarding ethical and regulatory challenges. As artificial intelligence adoption grows, so do concerns about ethics and regulations and governance. How can executives navigate the ethical and legal challenges associated with AI and ensure responsible and compliant use within their organizations? And I think Gilles may have some things to say about this too, but Anna, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll try to start because it's a really big question in many ways.
I know.
But I'll try to. Well, thanks, ChatGPT. Thank you. I'll try to unpack it though a bit. So maybe first of all, I think the challenge that we have as societies, in a way, with AI is that it is really a general purpose technology. It's a technology that has so many different shapes and forms and so many use cases and it can be used in so many different ways depending on the context. So for regulators, for policymakers, and for business leaders, it's partly hard to come just up with rules because context really matters. And especially in this context, in AI, just coming up with the one rule or the one policy on how to cover this technology that can, on one hand, be used, making decisions in emergency rooms, triage decisions that are literally life and death decisions, as well as, telling you where to turn right to go to the supermarket and anything in between. So there's really, this is just hard. I think we should just kind of say that. Then, because it really is, it's like electricity, right? Like it's regulating electricity. I think often we make that comparison, and there are lots of other comparisons. They not all work fully, but still, it's a really difficult challenge. The second one is, of course, like every technology, like every new technology, it does come with a whole host of risks, and I think we more and more are aware of these risks now, and some of them are harms actually that we see in the world already, and that are manifesting, and that's because, for example, decisions that are being made are actually made because of certain biases that the training data, that came from the training data, and so that are reproduced. We see more and more issues in a way with the way this technology is being used, and some of them are kind of technologically, like, because of the technology and the way the technology works, AI works, and some of them are more how it is used. And so, but and then on top of that, we see risks that emerge that might be even worse, right? Like we're starting to see some risks that should concern us even more. And so in all of that, I think, so there are all kinds of different ways now we can mitigate those risks and we can respond to those risks. And I think, and I know that both my two colleagues will be able to talk a bit more about some of them as well. But in general, I like to think of them in kind of 4 different buckets. There is one bucket that is, in a way, what I call generally kind of awareness, education, and education. And I do think there is a general role of us all, like having sessions like this, but I think, the way we want to think about to actually bring it to schools, for example, the way we as informed consumers about their rights, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a general kind of what is this technology and how do we deal with it so that every individual is better informed and can make better choices. Then there is and by the way, that includes those who are actually developing and deploying AI. And so that's part of the answer when we talk about ethics. I think partly exposing computer scientists who are the ones that partly, you know, develop and build the technology, for them to be better equipped to think about these ethical considerations as they're building it, as opposed to afterwards. And there's just a huge lack of frankly awareness and education in that sector. Like, no computer scientist has to take a single ethics class, at least not in Canada. I don't know how it is in other countries, but so there is just really that generally the partly the culture and the kind of the education system for computer scientists, developers, coders, etc., is one that doesn't necessarily have a lot of ethical considerations baked in. The second category in terms of risk mitigation to me is everything that I call under the heading of self-regulation, right? Anything, and that is basically industry coming together and saying, hey, we're seeing these risks, let's do something about it. And there are lots of ways that, you know, industry has done something about it, and will probably do more about it. And that is standards, right? Like standards, like in lots of other industries, we have more and more kind of standards, both internationally and nationally, standard bodies that come up with certain ways of actually doing this, you know, building, deploying the technology. We can think of impact assessment tools. Maria already mentioned some of the tools that they use. So there are actual tools that can mitigate some of these risks that we're seeing. The third category is everything under kind of regulation legislation. So, and that too, we're seeing more and more of. The EU has a legislative framework now, the EU Act. Canada is certainly currently has a law in front of Parliament, and there's lots of other countries who are working on it. And so more and more we will see different, potentially, and we're seeing already different approaches to how governments are responding to some of these risks, and what kind of rules and regulations they are setting up. And then lastly, there is basically the international sphere. So how do we as the international community, how do we think of our international institutions, and how to set some of these rules and to address some of these risks? Because I think we all agree that overall AI is a technology that is really hard to just regulate, you know, in country A, because country B might already, you know, do something very differently. And so I think eventually we do need to come together a bit as a global community to agree on some of these rules, and we need to agree who are the institutions that actually will set those rules. And how do we then comply with these rules? So those, I think, all I just kind of maybe say, but like these are a couple of ways, and I think how we can mitigate some of these risks. And some of them include really just, some basic educational kind of ways of bringing ethical considerations to the forefront of the development of AI.
Thank you. Maria or Gilles, did you want to add to that?
Please, Maria.
Perhaps a different way of answering this question is how have we helped our clients deal with those questions, ethics and risks. And as early as 2017, our clients started surfacing some of the questions like, how biased is my model? How am I able to explain a decision made by the model? How do I govern a technology that is probabilistic in nature, continues to evolve and interact with the environment? Well, most of my processes are very linear in nature. How do I really understand what are the key AI application that I should be pursuing and what I should be investing? And by having those questions, we recognize very early on that once there's a different degree of maturity and adoption and understanding of AI across markets and industries. If in financial services we have AI being deployed for much longer than in many industries, it's fair to say the financial transaction in the world have been running on artificial intelligence for some decades. Financial services, as a result, will have a different understanding of risk management and ethics. But when we step outside of financial services, we see the lack of understanding to consider risk management as a discipline as important as as engineering, and being able to educate not just the engineers themselves about the need to perform risk-related activities across the life cycle, development life cycle, but including the executives who need to allow for budgets and bandwidth for engineers to perform these types of activities. And for a long time, engineers will operate based on the mantra, just because we can, we should do it. And suddenly we've seen the world being flooded with headlines where we saw algorithms harming people, recruitment tool, discriminating against women, cards that will award what much higher credit limits to men in having the same conditions like a woman. And in this case, we've started to have a different the tide started to change, meaning the executive realized those risks are not something that will happen in the future. They are happening right now. And most of the times, the reason behind those risks emerging, it was because those implications were not considered. So how do we change the mindset of how do we build and use this technology to include this impact assessment, this pause and reflect exercise where we come together as a collective and ask the question, but who benefits if we deploy this tool and who loses? And I think this is how we start educating everyone who needs to know about AI, by bringing them into the fold, coming together around the very specific use cases, and being able to demonstrate firsthand how rules, or the lack of rules, being enforceable through regulation or standards, or being self-regulation, or being more guidance in nature, will make a significant impact on how that chatbot, on how that recommendation engine, or how that recruitment tool will end up being used in the enterprise. And while there is an intervention, as Anna said, is a toolbox on intervention to address the risk and the ethics of AI, as a leader, I think we need to go together in a journey, because artificial intelligence is a domain, a computer science domain, is highly sophisticated. And no matter how much we try to simplify it so that everyone understands it, it's quite complex. But there not all this complexity needs to be understood by the decision makers. So it's important to make this distinction in what do we need to know in order to make those decisions that are will result in growing our businesses, but also bringing our people on the journey, while we relying on a variety of experts, not just our engineers. And while we have those tools, what we have to work harder as a global community is to continue a more realistic dialogue on AI, not just the hyper-eyes where AI is going to kill us, or look, AI is going to save us from all the evils. Something that's much more balanced, it's much more grounded in the common sense and the reality of the day, where we have an actual problem to solve, is how do I reduce the cost of my contact centers while I maintain the vast majority of my workers in the call center, because not only I appreciate their expertise, but also I want to bring them into this journey of more wealth and prosperity that AI will trigger.
And if I can just jump in here briefly, I just wanted to say that I couldn't agree more, but also on top of it, like, and what we see ultimately, it is about, as so often, about leadership and culture, and to a certain degree governance. But when we see actually what makes the difference of whether an organization kind of thinks about AI in a responsible way or not. And because so much so far, both in industry and research in AI, we see just the pace is so fast, and the way we think about AI is such that often those considerations is not because the people don't have them, or they don't have the ethical questions. It's more that there is not enough space that is made for it, and there's just really not the time to think about them. And so often so apart from, of course, the actual more technical mitigation strategies and the tools that one can have, so often the real barriers to, for example, mitigate some of these risks are around, do we have a culture of where someone can say, oh, I'm not sure if this is a great idea, or this might have this kind of impact, or is it actually the right thing to do here? And can we maybe, instead of launching in 2 days, can we launch in 1 week so that we have a bit of time to get, XYZ figured out better? So often it really ultimately is about these kind of structures and these kind of conversations that need to happen, as opposed to the technical solution or mitigation around these kind of issues.
It sounds to me like both you and Maria are sort of encouraging this idea of artificial intelligence is moving so fast, but it doesn't mean that we have to move that fast. We can reflect. We can take a week instead of 2 days to make a decision. In the interest of time, I'll just move over to the next question, which is on data privacy and security. With artificial intelligence heavy reliance on data, concerns about privacy and security are paramount. What should executives prioritize in terms of data protection, and how can they build trust with customers and stakeholders while utilizing AI for personalization and efficiency? Gilles, maybe you could start by answering this question. I know that you work with the French government and the European Union, and I imagine privacy and security is part of that discussion.
Thank you. You know what? I believe it touches upon very much to the last question, actually. Yeah. And it relates to the way we organize the regulation overall. We have had some interesting discussion recently, for instance, at the G7 level, in between the 7 most powerful countries, on whether we should regulate AI and generative AI. I think the outcome of this was probably more consistent than what we've read in the newspapers, because there was a common understanding of the dangers, and the reason why there are some dangers is that basically it's a powerful technology. It's a game changing in many aspects, and therefore, as each of the past game changing technologies, such as for instance electricity, it comes with new challenges in general. And I believe that there are different degrees of regulation. There are the top level of regulation, which is probably G7, making sure that you don't have, like, I would say, asymmetries in between countries. Let's say the EU passes the AI Act, but the US don't, or the UK doesn't. And therefore, that would create an asymmetry on which the innovators and the bad guys, so to say, would probably go in these countries to make their bad development, and that would be not in the interest of anyone, including the EU, because we would still have these technologies, because I would say it can be distributed from everywhere, basically. So that's one thing. We need to have a common agreement. It's very, I would say, it resembles very much to CO2, for instance. It's the same type of global regulation, or actually GDPR. GDPR, which includes an extraterritorial aspect, which makes that even though you are in the US, for instance, as a European citizen, you're still protected by the law in some ways. So I think that these are the key two layers. The first layer, which is the global layer, the second, which is the European layers, which is interesting. But the third layer is probably what I would call like the tech civil society in general. If you look at dark patterns, for instance, we had many of these in the hyperscalers, large company platforms such as Meta, Google, and so on, which have been removed because the I would say the feeling of the medias, of the citizens, of everyone actually, the backlash was so strong to these companies that eventually they agreed to remove all these dark patterns. We still have a lot of dark patterns, but much less than before. And I would say it's the common culture of the developers, of the coders, of the users, which eventually made that they had to remove this. So we need to build the same thing with civil societies, which come to the point that there needs to be a common education on AI. I think that, I believe that there should be some responsibility into corporation, into the management of companies, some education in there. But I also believe that there should be a much larger scope, which is the general society, that there should be a culture. It's not a technique, it's not deep knowledge, it's something which is common to everyone, that some certain thing hasn't to be done. It's not nice to do certain aspects. And eventually, it's, I would say, a discussion in between hard law and soft law. The soft law, it's actually what is commonly agreed, and the hard law is what we see that needs to have some regulation. I'm a little bit skeptical about the fact that the EU came with a very strong law very early on in the launch of generative AI, and because I believe that probably over time we'll see that it needs some adaptation and maybe some very deep ones. So, and I think that the thing we need the most is to have a common culture, and the difficulty is that this technology is probably not comparable to no technology before, in the sense that it's coming very quickly. So the time to adapt is very limited, and therefore I'm afraid that we might see some, I would say, abuse frequently before we found the solution for the masses.
Thank you, Gilles. In the interest of time, I'll just go to the last question that I have, and then I'd like to ask the audience if they have some questions. This question relates to artificial intelligence, talent, and workforce. So, artificial intelligence demands specialized skills and expertise. What are the best approaches for executives to upskill their workforce, attract AI talent, and build a culture that fosters innovation and collaboration using AI? I'll leave it to the panel. Who would like to go first? Maria?
Again, I can speak about our examples. Our example in PwC. So, first of all, we have been thinking how to best educate our workforce. We are a professional services firm. The backbone of our firm is auditors and accountants. So educating or digital upskilling 300,000 people, the vast majority who are still, your boring accountant. It was a bit of a challenge because you can't really you can't really boring in the best way possible. Boring to the extent is a very solid job. But what I wanted to say is that having a legacy, being a legacy organization, it's a bit of a journey to be able to upskill people to understand what artificial intelligence is, because without solid digital skills, you can't really comprehend AI. You can't really comprehend that besides the two key components of AI, which is data and the model, the context plays such an important role, as both Gilles and Anna have mentioned before. And in fact, I just wanted very quickly to the previous questions of what executives should do about data. Get your data in order. Without a solid data strategy that is a top priority, you can't really talk about AI. And we know that many organizations, the legacy organization, which is the vast majority of the world, not the tech, the glitzy tech, big or small or medium, are legacy organization where the data is a mess. It's enough to sit in a crisis room with the CDOs who looked at each other or the other executive when a leak happens, and none of them know where the leak is coming from, to understand what the big mess data is currently. So you can't really talk about AI without having a data strategy. But coming back to how do we educate? How do we bring the workforce? First, we need to make sure that there is a solid understanding of the digital world, the importance of the data, before we talk about sophisticated data processing, including AI. But the one way to do it faster and accelerate this is what we have done in PwC when we have been in front of this massive social revolution, as Joshua Benjo called ChatGPT. You know, it was last year in December. Many of our colleagues, the children of our colleagues, have started playing with ChatGPT only for the start of the year in January for our colleagues to be very tempted to use ChatGPT in the context of work. And it was a swift decision from leadership who said, we're not going to forbid the use of ChatGPT in the work context, but we need to have some clear rule in place. And they issued very quickly a policy, an internal policy of use for ChatGPT that says the type of data we are allowed to put in the model.
Well, we have a little connection problem. Give it a second. Maybe Anna, you want to jump in while we're waiting for Maria to begin?
Happy to. I mean, the only thing that I wanted to add is that in addition, I mean, I think we all, there's some basic education, some basic informing of what the technology is, I think is really useful. And I think from there, and that's for every organization. Without, I think, again, this hype. Maria, you're back. Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, it looks like my internet connection is unstable. I'll say very quickly, but perhaps the internet is telling me to shut up once and for all, is to say that when you give this tool, you put this tool in the hands of your colleagues, you not only achieve a higher level of understanding what this technology is firsthand by playing with it, but also you unleash a ton of creativity. What we have done post this exercise is to empower our colleagues to submit ideas of how ChatGPT can improve our work. And we ended up collecting hundreds of use cases, which went through a process of assessment, of prioritization. But what we have learned from this exercise is that sometimes the traditional training, it's not as efficient as allowing people to play with this tool. And especially now that it's so easy to access generative AI and to see firsthand the power, the transformative power, why not empowering them to use it and allowing them, trusting them that will use it in a responsible and ethical manner. And when the boundary is now very clear, put some boundaries in place, but bring your people along in that journey, because this bottom-up approach to digital transformation, coupled with the top-down, is the one that will drive the best result.
I think that is a great conclusion to that question. And I don't know if the panelists can stay a few minutes extra, but I'd like to open the floor to the questions to the audience. So if you just raise your hand, I will address you, and then I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. So audience, anyone have a question they would like to ask the panelists? Anyone have a question for the panelists? By audience today. Oh, I have Saeed Mohammed. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So, good evening, everyone. So there's been a long-standing debate as to whether artificial intelligence tools should replace human beings at work. And there have been varied set of responses employing various mechanisms to employ, as in if various perspectives, as in this way it's ethical, in this way it's not ethical. So what would the panelists suggest as an appropriate approach towards AI replacing human beings at work? And if so, how could it be done in an ethical manner, as they say? Because I believe that if I were to give my personal opinion, I believe this should come from a point of view of productivity and perhaps being cost effective, or perhaps being less risky than a human being at work. If the AI meets those criteria, I believe it could be employed. But I would love to hear the perspective of the panelists on how AI could replace human beings at work in a perhaps ethical manner. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Gilles wanted to comment on that.
So thank you for the question. It could be a very long answer, but I'll try to make it short. First, there is very little literature about, scientific literature about what should come out of the AI in terms of job replacement. And I think that this lack of literature makes that the media are, I would say, building a lot of cases which are completely unfounded. And truly, we don't know. The only experience we have is the history of other techniques, such as steam power, electricity, and so on. And I think that there are a few things to probably have in mind in there. First, we don't know yet where this technology will lead us. So it's completely unsure the degree of productivity gain that we'll have from this technology. It goes from 0 to like 200, 300%. I've read a lot of things about that. But I think that the most important thing, it's not the level of the productivity, it's the speediness of the change. I would say the Schuppenterier friction is probably much higher, much harsher if it's on a short period of time. If we have a long time, if we have like, let's say 10 years, it will be much easier to adapt and to adapt the retraining of workers and to make sure that it goes okay. The second aspect, it's on whether we're gonna increase, I would say, augment the worker capability by letting them be more creative, removing, I would say the tailorization, or re-tailorize the worker with the AI. And I think that's a matter of regulation as well. So we should definitely go for the first and not for the second, but it's clearly unsure yet which direction it will take. And I think this is interesting as well. And the third thing, I think it's really important to consider that the social system has a role to play in there, in retraining the worker and making sure that, I would say, we take part of the productivity gain to invest in this retraining as well. So that's the key outcome that I've read recently about that. There are many more comments that I could do on this aspect, but those are the three things that I believe that are the most important.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Maria, you wanted to say something?
I also want to add, in terms of what Gilles said, is that the machine should always replace human activities, not humans per se. And I think that there's a slight change in narrative that needs to happen, especially at the business level. The fact that for a long time, including the current times, executives think about AI as a tool to achieve higher level of performance for the enterprise. But in this higher level of performance, rarely performance includes the well-being and respect and empowering of their employees. And until we actually see the employees as, if not one of the most valuable asset of one organization, we won't be able to change the narrative, because there always would be almost a challenge in between machines and humans, and machine acquire or exceed human capacity. We as a human will lose the challenge. But that's not, having a challenge is not what we should be thinking. What should be thinking is that we have a powerful tool that could be a genuine value add to how we perform the jobs, but it has to be human driven. So back to your question, how do we do it more ethically? By designing human centric AI. We cannot ignore the human needs and expertise and knowledge and interest from how we design and implement AI. And the only way to do it is by changing the narrative and empowering the business leader to think differently, but relying on the policy and regulation, who we know it's going to be slow. And we look how fast generative AI improves and how it caught by surprise many policymakers around the world. We need to intervene in in a variety of ways. And the most important is to make sure the narrative is correct and make sure that the voices of the employees are represented. There's a lot of conversation about bringing the unions at the same table when we discuss AI in the workplace to represent the voice of the voiceless, and recognizing also the last thing is that there's a lot of hidden work that goes into giving us the AI of today that's not recognized. The quality of AI we have today is because of the work of millions of people that annotated data, for example. And that needs to be brought to the surface. And then we are looking at the regulators and the policymakers to say, we need support to make this a norm, a society norm that will incentivize those who are prioritizing human-centric AI and obviously penalize those who will replace, like a black and white, replace humans with machines.
Well, I 1 hour is just not enough time to talk about all these issues, but we have time for maybe one more question. I saw somebody raise their hand, but
there's a question also in the chat that I'm very happy. I'm going to try to respond to relatively briefly by Kathleen, and it's around the incentivizing around AI ethics and standards. It's a great question, and I really literally could spend hours just talking about that part. But the short answer is, so these standards that came out for AI ethics are actually excellent. They're the way they were developed are excellent. But yes, we haven't seen a lot of traction and adoption. And mostly the issue really is in a way the gap between some principles and recommendations and then practices, right? In day-to-day practices. And those are hard sometimes to bridge, or often hard to bridge. And so the answer to that is really in a way by building it into your business processes, or actually the process itself on how AI is developed. And as Maria already also mentioned, I mean, we also work with a similar kind of framework, basically AI lifecycle framework. At every part of an AI system development, you can basically embed some of these ethical questions. So that's why one way, in a way of incentivizing or just making it part of the process. The second part, I think we talked already a bit about, is really the culture and leadership, right? Like if it's something that is not taken seriously, or if it's seen as a kind of a nice to have, in addition, like a kind of cute thing that maybe one wants to think about, and that's still often the way actually ethics is talked about in the AI world, well, then I think you don't need to kind of necessarily wonder why it is not, taken up, or why people are not thinking about ethics enough. So much about it is about the tone that is set from the top, and the way there is time to pause, to think, to question what we're doing. That's something really that it comes from an organizational kind of structure, leadership, and culture. And then there is, I think, a lot of really kind of education training. And I think I agree with Maria that this doesn't have to be necessarily training in the formal way, but I think different ways of allowing people to think about and play with the technology and think about some of the ethical considerations that I think for most of us are quite obvious, I would say. But there is a real gap between some of the concept and the principles around ethics and how it is practiced. But I think we're getting somewhere, and I think more and more organizations are trying to break it down into something that is practically embedded and day-to-day, basically, and that it is not like an afterthought.
Thank you, Anna. We will end the... Sorry, go ahead.
So right to point out, there's a ton of incentives we might need, but if I were to look at how I've struggled to make ethics a standalone set of activities in the life cycle, I would say give me the space to think, and give me the space to think and the recognition this work matters. Before we actually think of how do we incentivize people with monetary on financial or non-financial incentives, because having the space to think that comes from the top, it's when you embedded in your work, you have time to reflect, time to research, time to debate, but then also it has to be doubled with the recognition that that time goes towards achieving a higher level of quality of the product you're building. And if you have this, which is it's a leadership intervention and it has a cultural element in it, you set up a very solid foundation for more sets of incentives that will empower more people to think about it. But if you don't have this foundation, you'll struggle. And I've seen, and if you read the news, AI ethicists are being burned out left and right because they don't have this space and the recognition that the work they do matters. And we need to be able to say, yes, we are recognizing the value an ethicist bring. We're going to reward it as such, but also we're going to hire more to build the teams that will keep us honest. And once you have this group that will be as an external conscience, if you want, that will be able to question and critique the decision made by the leadership, will have a higher chance to see those ethical principles coming truly to life.
Thank you. So we'll end the series today. As I mentioned, 1 hour is not nearly enough to talk about everything, but I hope this was useful to some of you. I know I learned quite a bit today, so I really want to thank Maria and Anna and Gilles for participating and joining for today. It was really great to have your different perspectives from different parts of the world as well, and your different angles on this topic. So thank you so much to the three of you, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to host you, and I hope you'll join us in November, where we'll have another webinar series talking about climate change and what we as individuals and organizations can concretely do with regards to climate change. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and wherever you are in the world, I wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.